Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another series of From the CTL, the Center for Teaching and Learning here on campus. And so today we have an exciting guest. This is Avery Cook. I know you all know her, but Avery is the person who is making sure that your students have their accommodations that they need, that making sure that your students can get the best out of their education, and making sure that you as a faculty have the resources to do such a great job in helping your students. Avery's the person who makes it all happen for us. Avery, tell us. That was my very brief overview, but I really don't know. So what do you do, Avery? Tell us about your job. What is your
100%.
title? What is your title first, if I need
Yes.
to look you up?
So I am the Accessibility Services Coordinator. I am the head of the Accessibility Services Office. Just for understanding how the structure in our office works. Dean and I work together. Who he is our accommodations specialist. I am the Accessibility Services Coordinator, and we both report to Kirby in the CAS.
I think half the campus reports to
I
Kirby.
yes,
If
yeah.
you don't work here and you're watching this, you might report to Kirby too. Just check. Check. He's busy.
Oh yeah, he's got a lot going on. I will say, so my responsibility doing what I do with accessibility is ensuring that our students have equitable access to the classroom and to campus, regardless of disabilities. So one of the biggest thing that people know accessibility services for is obviously if you have a student with a disability, 9 times out of 10, they're going to connect with me and I'm going to get them an accommodation plan and they're going to have that equitable access. I think something that a lot of people, when we talk about accessibility, they think, oh, you're a student success support. No, I do not do student success. I do not do success.
Also great, but
Great, also great, wonderful, fantastic. But accommodations are not meant to be a leg up. They are meant to be equitable, meaning that if your average student is here, a student with a disability might be down here for certain things, and an accommodation bridges this gap, not this gap. Does that make sense?
yeah.
And so one of the things I really like to remind everybody about is that I do not provide these accommodations in order for students to be successful. I provide these accommodations to ensure that students have equitable access to the classroom. And that's pretty much my goal in whatever way that seems fit. Sometimes that's sitting down with an instructor and the student and helping that student advocate for themselves. Sometimes that's just an accommodation plan and I never see that student again for the rest of the semester, and so it really just depends on the student, depends on the need. But also I work mostly with instructors, like you guys are my coworkers, people watching this. And so it's like me and the instructor are the ones who provide the accommodations. And so working with you guys one-on-one, that is mostly what my role looks like to ensure that you guys also have the resources and supports to make that education equitable.
Fantastic. So you and I have talked about accommodations and working with students many times.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know you've chatted with everybody, but talk a little bit about what are some of the most common types of accommodations that our students here at SCTCC need to make sure that they have that equitable access to education.
Yeah, 100%. So I will say that we usually have a top 4 category of accommodation. The first one and the most common one is our testing accommodations. So testing accommodations, usually the first thing that comes to people's mind is additional time. But testing accommodations also cover an alternative test site, alternative format tests, if you need a scribe, if you need a reader, things like that. Another one would be classroom accommodations. So that's accommodations that would impact in class. Those are going to be the ones that most impact instructors. Things like note-taking support or a certain seat in the classroom. Things like that where it'll impact more of the classroom. And then we also have physical accommodations. So if a student needs a certain desk or a certain chair, or maybe specifically not a chair, maybe they're in a wheelchair and they need a desk that can fit a wheelchair that doesn't have another chair there. That is also what we do. Let's see, I think alternative format is the other most common accommodation we do. So that means providing alternative format textbooks, providing alternative format tests, alternative format handouts or PowerPoints, like your notes, if a student needs something like that too.
Well, and I know there can be a tendency for instructors to think, oh, this is going to be so much extra work. It's so hard. And I mean, sometimes it is a couple of extra steps, but I, I've been an instructor for a long time. And once I sort of got, because I didn't know about accessibility
Yeah.
accommodations. And once I kind of figured out, oh, I'm just doing this, it was no big deal. I know I was very thrown the first semester that I had a student who needed accommodations, and it was a student who had trouble hearing. And so I had to clip on a little thing,
Yeah.
and I had to make sure that I was facing her most of the time in class. And it took me probably a class session to kind of get adjusted to that. But then I'm like, oh, well,
Mhm.
but now I have it. I've got this. I have these skills. I feel very cool.
Yeah, I
And
would
I'm
say that
helping my students. I mean, the whole point, help my
right.
students. That's
I
kind of what I'm here for.
That's what I'm saying. I think a lot of our instructors are really good at that additional step. Like they're really good at making sure that they're taking that, like you said, to clip on their mic. They're taking that extra step to shoo other students away from the accessible desk, like, oh, sorry, you can't sit there. That's for a specific student. Sorry. Like I think that those extra steps are usually where our faculty thrive. Um, and I'm actually really proud of that. I used to work at another college, and that was not really a skill of that like extra step, and so I definitely think that we have a great community here when it comes to putting in the work, you know. Um, I think that for every college across America, the biggest issue, quote unquote, for faculty with accommodations is sometimes that feeling of like, this isn't fair, you know. It's not about the work on their end. It's just like, oh, that's not fair. My other students can't do that. And that's kind of where I find that it's hard to ease that kind of thought process.
It is. And I would say again, sort of as a faculty who member who didn't really know anything. I had a semester, and I think you said this, but I had a semester where one of the accommodations one of my students needed was to have access to my class notes and my outline
Yeah.
that I made for class. And
Mhm.
my first impulse was, wait, why would I give that to you? But I was like, oh, well, just give it to everybody then. Because
Yeah,
why not? I mean, now
totally.
I'm kind of it's sort of helping me rethink, well, how do I make this a little more accessible to everybody then? Why not?
Yes. Well, and that's usually what I try to say when I have instructors, like, for example, continuing that same, they're like, well, I don't think it's fair that this student is getting my notes and no other students are getting my notes. And that's when we have to have the conversation of why, like, why are your notes, something that your students can't have access to? Why can't that be a resource of theirs?
Right.
Um, and we talk about like, I can't, and one of the things that make it challenging is I can't look at an instructor and be like, listen, this student doesn't have hands, so they need your notes in order to have notes, right? Um, and that's hard because I can't share that information. Um, but usually when instructors feel like they know what's wrong, they feel like, oh, this will fix it. And that's kind of where that trust has to come in between like, I promise you that I'm not steering you wrong. Um, but I do think that it's that like, you know, making sure that everybody has access to some of these things. Like if you're worried about one student having access, like, oh, like I don't want to share my notes, or a big one is like extended time. Like, oh, I don't want one student to have more time than everybody else. And one of the things that I tell instructors who really struggle allowing students to have extra time on tests is, why is it timed? Like, why is it timed at all?
Right.
You
Right.
know? And a lot of the
Maybe
time,
this is just that push to think about it in a new way.
yeah, yeah. Cause I will tell you, when I was in my master's program, we had this whole discussion about accessible testing. And my instructor, she was like, I don't time my tests at all. Because the way I designed my tests are you can't cheat on them, and obviously like now like, you can cheat quote unquote on like anything. But they were not questions that a book could answer. They're not like, oh, if I go to chapter 15 page 4, like I'm going to find the answer to this question. And so she was like, I didn't have to worry about timing it to make sure no one could cheat, and so making that test like unlimited time but also like, if you take 6 hours on that test, that's on you. you know
But if you
um
take 6 hours and now, I didn't know that I needed it. I didn't ask for an accommodation, but now I
yeah,
have 6 hours to spend on that test. And I really think through it and I do a fantastic job
yeah,
and I really cemented my knowledge. I mean, no one has lost in this scenario.
totally, exactly. Well, and one of the things that I talk to, I guest lecture at State sometimes, and one of the things that I talk to some of these college counseling and student development students is like, when you're talking about, grades, right? A grade is not how well do you memorize information, right? A grade is how well have you shown your knowledge. And one of the things that comes with a test is grades, right? Like, you have the grades that, you're getting an A on this exam. And if people are looking up answers in their textbooks, right? They're learning that information regardless of when they learned it, because everyone learns something here and there. um but I think that there are some programs that definitely you can stop what you're doing and look in a book to get your answer correct. I still use my textbooks from grad school that I've already read through once, you know, um, but I don't have everything memorized. But being able to like utilize my textbook during an exam gave me the ability to learn how to do that, like learn how to reference something in a book, use a table of contents, use a glossary. I'm preaching to the choir here, Mary. I know that, but
Absolutely. But no, I teach a lot of grad student classes, but
Mhm.
I've taken a bunch of grad student classes. And I mean, I really struggled through a couple of years of statistics and I struggled with the tests because I'm not good at math. I'm not good at stats. And having to like memorize everything was just, I mean, I didn't test it very well, but I'm pointing to the world of research. I've done a bunch of research and because I can just use my computer and it will help me to figure out the right statistical test and it'll help me to figure
Mhm.
out how to do the math. And I mean, did my teacher make me memorize all this stuff not that didn't help me learn it. I
Yeah.
would have been better off if I'd had a textbook to refer to.
Well, and I think that it's also important, like during this conversation, to be like, there's definitely programs where you just have to know the information. Like
Sure.
memorizing is key. Like a nurse just genuinely has to
That was going to be
know,
my example too,
right? You
is
just kind
look,
of have to
you
know,
have to
like
know how to do this.
X, Y, and Z. But I think even something like we were just talking about like our land surveying classes. Like even those classes, like you're in the field. You don't have like you can't just like pull a textbook down and
Right.
double check what the right whatever to make sure something doesn't flood looks like, you know. You have to just kind of know that. And so again, like unlimited testing time isn't reasonable for everybody. But it is something to consider if it's, giving on one student additional time, is something that you struggle with or something that you don't feel comfortable with. Um, think to yourself, just kind of like what doesn't make me comfortable? What am I worried about? And if you ever need someone to just like connect with, you can always connect with me. I'm more than happy to be the opposing side of the argument, whatever that is, just to have that discussion and make you feel confident about your decision.
I don't think faculty are ever going to go wrong by rethinking how you do your class. And I know it's
Yeah.
really tempting. I mean, I taught the same class over and over and over again every single semester for about 10 years. It's really tempting to say, oh, but I've got it all set. I don't want to change anything. But I got forced into a scenario where I had to redo a couple of my classes and kind of mesh them together. But one of the things that came out of that is I started letting students do assignments in teams. You could do it by yourself if you want to, but if you're taking this class with a friend, you can do it together because I'm a librarian. I teach future librarians. We have to know how to collaborate. It's not
Yeah.
really important that you know how to do it by yourself. It's actually might be better for you to do this
Mhm.
together with somebody else. You both turn it in, you both get the same grade, but they could choose to. And that was a real revelation for me. It wasn't because of an accommodation, but I think accommodations can often be that jumping off point to think, oh,
Yeah.
why am I doing this?
Yeah. Well, and I find
What could I be doing better?
that's what I mean. It's just like I just think that accommodations are things that would benefit everybody because that's us going way back to the beginning, right? When we talk about student success and how that's not what I do. a lot of people confuse what I do with student success because it would help them.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I personally needed accommodations when I was in high school and when I was in college. And so I remember when my friends, I would be like, "Oh yeah, like I get a little extra time on this because simply I cannot do it in the time allotted because I can't focus. Like my ADHD is so bad, if you haven't noticed, that I cannot sit still and take an exam for an hour. I need that extra time so that I can fidget and I can look at the paint color on the wall and be like, hey, that looks like my grandma's house from 1994. Like, I have to be able to have that time.
Right.
And then I remember all of my friends would be like, that's not fair. I would do so much better if I had extra time because I get stressed, and there's a natural anxiety that comes with testing, and so that doesn't, you don't have to have like generalized anxiety disorder to experience testing anxiety. And I have so many people who come to my office who say, well, I have testing anxiety, so I need extra time. And I'm like, okay, well, we have to have a little bit more than that to give an accommodation, but it shows me how many students would just benefit from having extra time in general. And with the wave of online testing, a lot of people get nervous about like just using websites or, texting each other the answers because you're not in a classroom setting. Um, and that's kind of one of those things of like, in the real world, I would text Mary if I had a question about,
Right.
something that I was working on that maybe she could help me with. I understand that that's not like the goal. Like, we don't want people to be like, this isn't a class that teaches us how to collaborate, but those soft skills are interwoven into everything that we do.
It matters. All that stuff
Yeah,
matters. Well, so I think you lead us to our next point here. What is the general procedure? How
yeah,
how do accommodations start?
totally. So step one, 100% of the time is I need student self-disclosure. So that means the student has to come to my office, they have to email me, they have to fill out the application for services, something to say, hey, Avery, I have a disability that I need support with. So for example, I can't have a parent fill the form out for them. I can't have a parent call me and say, little Josh needs, his accommodation plan. I can't have an instructor call me and say, hey, Avery, so-and-so is going to get an accommodation plan with you. Um, I need the student to come to me themselves. And again, if they fill that form out, our first meeting could be our welcome meeting, but they don't have to come before they fill out the application. But I need to have that self-disclosure. Um, and then after that form is filled out, that application for services, then I have a sit down meeting with them for an hour, and that's our welcome meeting. That's the meeting where we have this discussion about what accommodations work for them and what do they think they need and how do they think they need it. And this meeting is often what causes the most quote unquote like controversy with what I do because people are like, it's subjective, like what they need is something you decide, or they're just saying whatever they think that they need. And what I do is a little more complicated than that. So if you give me just a second, I can actually pull up the exact wording
Fantastic.
um
Well,
with
and I think
how
that
this all
idea
works.
that you're not just sitting in your office, just like making this stuff up in your
Yeah.
head. You,
Yeah.
Avery, you're like, oh, they're so cute. Look,
Yeah.
I'm going to give them
Oh.
an extra hour on their test because they're adorable.
Right.
I mean, yes, maybe some subjectiveness has to go into an accommodation, but
Right.
you are in fact a trained professional
It's
who
true.
are working with other trained professionals, maybe doctors, maybe others, to
Mhm.
get the best results.
Yeah, 100%. And that's kind of one of the things is that like there is like a legal standard here with the ADA with the section 504 where it's like this is accommodations are great. And I think a lot of people don't know that accommodations aren't just something that our school does and
It's
it's
not
not
just
just
nice.
right. It's not like, oh,
It's a law.
man, right. This is the law and accommodations are students' federal civil rights. And
Yeah,
so when we have these conversations, and if someone goes, I really don't want to provide the student extra time, that's one of those things where, like, I hear that you don't want to do it, and I totally get that. Um, there's not
and
a way
yet.
to say no. Right, exactly. You can't say no. Um, and so, and I know that that can feel like you're taking away some of that like academic freedom, you know. And I know that that's a subject for a lot of people, is like, how does that work with this? But this is one of those things where federal law kind of comes before everything else. Accommodations do need to be implemented. But one of the things that I have accessible on our website for everyone to kind of take a peek at whenever they want, is how does accessibility services determine accommodations? And it is it's an interactive process. That's the biggest thing, is that this is not like here's the, lost your foot box, and these are all the accommodations that come with if you lose your foot, or here's the ADHD box, or here's the deaf and hard of hearing box. Accommodations are different for everybody because disability impacts everybody in a different way, so I ask 3 questions to get the information from students and figure out what they need and what can be supportive to them. The first one is, I ask students, like, do you have a disability? A disability is considered I'm going to read it, a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of such individual. What that means is that you can have a diagnosis, but not have that be a disability. Because if that diagnosis does not substantially limit your major life activities, and in college, that's college stuff, right?
Right.
Then there isn't any accommodations you're eligible for, even if you have a disability. So I think a really good example is like, if you have a student who broke their leg and they're in a wheelchair, if that student has no other concerns and they just broke their leg in a wheelchair and they have tables in their rooms that fit and they don't have to worry about going to, like walk out or leave the classroom to get pain meds or whatever,
They
they're
can
just
get
like,
in and out of the
yep,
doors. They
they
can
can
get
get
into
in.
the bathrooms.
Exactly. And that's their only concern. They're like, I just have a broken leg. That leg in the college context is not a disability, even though, in the definition of like disability, the colloquial term, yeah, that's a disability for sure.
It's complicating your life, but not your
Right.
college.
Exactly. And so there wouldn't be an accommodation plan needed for that student. Versus depression. That's another one where people are like, what can you do for depression? Well, it's like, if that substantially limits their ability to go to college, there's a lot that I can do. But if that's just something like, like it's winter and I'm sad because I don't get to see the sunshine, like, yeah, that might count as like seasonal affective disorder. That might count as like depression. But if it's not impacting you in a college context, there's not much that I can do. So that's the first thing that I do, is I figure out if they have a disability that is impacting them, their major life activities when it comes to college. The second question that I try to answer is, what barriers are present as a result of said disability? So not like, oh, like I just need more time on tests because I, have ADHD, because that's kind of going like backwards, if that makes sense.
Yes, I
We
followed
need,
that.
yeah, okay. Because what we need is, we need to say, you have the disability. What, what does that provide a barrier for? So for example, my ADHD, I like to use myself as an example because I am safe to talk about. Is my ADHD, the barrier that my ADHD presented me in my college classes was focus. I could not sit still long enough for my 3-hour master's courses. Like, that was way too long for me to sit down and focus on something. And so the barrier that was present was, I could not sit through this lecture. And then that kind of leads into my third question that I try to answer, which is, what reasonable accommodations can be implemented to remove or circumvent said barrier? And so that's when it's like, when it comes to my focus, if the focus is the barrier, because I don't have enough of it, right? I can't regulate my focus, then the accommodation is what's going to help me get around that barrier or to remove that barrier. And there are a lot of barriers that cannot be removed, but can be circumvented, and vice versa. Like with my focus, there's nothing in the world that is going to be able to remove the fact that I can't regulate my focus, especially not something that my community college can provide. But there can be things that can circumvent that barrier. And what does that barrier impact, right? Because the barrier impacted my ability to stay in class and thus my ability to get the information. So a really good like a thing that accommodation that circumvented this barrier for me was being able to record my lectures. Because even if I had to step out for 2 minutes just to like, take a quick walk, I was able to come back into the classroom and not have missed anything. And I could go back to my lectures. I could go back through that 2 minutes that I missed, right? So those three kind of questions are how accessibility services determines accommodation. And like I said, if there's no barriers present in result to a disability, there's nothing that I can do. And that's a really big part of what I talk about. And I will tell you, I turn a lot of students away who are very unhappy with me at the end of the day when they're like, but I have X, Y, and Z. And it's like, right, but X, Y, and Z isn't what's impacting your bad grade or what's impacting your testing. You're not doing well on your tests because you told me that you got a brand new job and you haven't been able to focus on studying. So regardless of disability, if that's the concern, that's not a disability related barrier. And I don't do that.
Our students have a lot of other
Oh,
potential
totally.
barriers,
Yeah,
and we have other organizations around campus, and we'll be talking with them over the course of the next few weeks. But yeah, I mean, I like that idea that what you do for students is very focused, it's very
yeah,
deliberate, and I like that, it's federal law.
yeah,
This is a thing, so we all need to get on board.
totally.
So now let's say I'm a faculty member
Yeah.
and I see a student who has a broken arm, or just came to class today with a broken arm, or a student who I feel like is experiencing problems with my class in a way that I don't necessarily need to define, but I feel like there's a problem. What should I do if the student hasn't come to me or you haven't come to me with an accommodation?
Yeah. So let's do the former first. So if you have a student who has like a visible physical disability that you see, I always recommend either pulling them aside at like a neutral location, not like in the middle of class, but before or after,
Hey,
where
your arm looks kind of funny back there. Do you want to wave that around for us all?
yeah, exactly. Like just trying to be a little
Maybe don't
mindful
do
of
that. Don't
privacy
do
and
that.
things.
Okay.
And saying like, hey, like I see that this is going on. Is there anything I can do? I will tell you, and this I think is just the human experience, but I don't want to generalize. Is that when people ask how they can help, it's people are more likely to say, oh God, yeah, like I need some help. So I do see a lot of students who will tell me that, like, yeah, my instructor just told me to come to you. Like there wasn't that like, like they just said it's not their responsibility and sent me on my
Mhm.
way. So my first suggestion 100% of the time is, hey, what's going on? Like, can I help? Is there something that I can do? Because even if there's nothing you can do, asking that question, starting that dialogue, because honestly, what you could do is help them with that referral or call me or shoot me an email with them CC'd on it. And if that's the bare minimum or that's all you can do, then like perfect. But I think always starting that conversation with what can I do? You seem to be not in a great place right now. Your arm's busted up. Like that doesn't seem like super great place to be in. Like, do you need help taking notes? Do you need this? Do you need that? And I will say that as a instructor, and this is just kind of like a overarching truth, you have full control over your classroom. So if you want to offer that student support with taking notes and providing them your notes, you can do that as long as that option is available to every other student. That's the difference between an accommodation plan and instructors just being able to do whatever they want in their class,
Okay.
is that you need to make sure as an instructor that you provide that same opportunity to every student if you are providing it to only one without an accommodation plan. If there is an accommodation plan, you do not have to offer it to every other student. But otherwise, if you don't want to say like, hey, like I'll just do that for you, you can say like, hey, let me connect you with Avery. Like, let me write an email or let me walk you to her office or whatever the situation may look like. Because you can clearly see there's a need. But again, if the student says like, honestly, my leg's just broken. There's not much that I think I need help with, because I still have the ability to write notes. I can still get to class. I can still, X, Y, and Z. Like, I'm pretty good. Um, that would be something that I wouldn't be able to help with, because there wouldn't be a disability related barrier that needed addressing. Now, not to complicate things, but with that student in a wheelchair, they might have additional barriers like transportation. Like if they're in a wheelchair now, they can't drive. They might not have a family or a friend person in their life that has like a vehicle that they can put a wheelchair in, you know? And that's when you would call our student support manager, Carly. She's the one who does non-academic student support, and that is where that would fall into. Even though it is disability related, that is more non-academic support because it's not like classroom or on-campus support, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then your other example of a student who you're like kind of see and you're like, like they seem like they're really struggling. I would really like to see if they have, like if you have a feeling, like a gut feeling that there's a disability involved, there's not much you can do because you can't
Okay.
walk up to somebody and go, "Are you disabled?" And I say that with all of the jest in the world. But that's how it comes across, regardless of how you say it. If
Right.
you walk up to someone and say, "Have you heard of accessibility services?" Immediately, like once they find out what that means, or if they already know, the immediate's like, um, you can't just like walk up and tell me that I have a disability,
You
So
seem weird today. Have you
yeah,
been to see Avery?
exactly. And so, but I know that that's part of our job is to like keep an eye out for, people so they don't fall through the cracks. So I always, always, always recommend that instead of saying like, hey, so you need accessibility services because I've decided that you're disabled. Um, you can literally what I would just say, hey, I've noticed something's been off with you lately. You're coming to class and it looks like you're pretty tired, or you seem like when you're in class you're real jittery and anxious and you kind of coming in and out and in and out and in and out. I want to just address that with you. Have those conversations with your students. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to take time to discuss their well-being. um my first thing is have those discussions, and during those discussions talk about resources on campus. So you seem a little on edge. We have some resources that I can definitely refer you to. We have our non-academic student support manager. We have our mental health counselor. We have accessibility services. You can discuss those things in general, say like bring them all up. The other thing you can do after you have that conversation is submit a Cyclones Care form. I push Cyclones Care so hard because it is a great way to put a student on my radar without having to have that student like connect with me directly, or without trusting that student to connect with me. You can put a Cyclones Care form in and say, hey, I have a student in my class who is sleeping all the time and they're fidgety and they're disruptive and da 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 da. And you can say, like, I think that there might be an accessibility concern here. And I would love to have someone reach out to the student and connect with them, because it won't be me. I'll let you know that right off the bat. If you say a student has an accessibility concern but you're not sure about it, Carly, our non-academic student support manager, will most likely be the one to reach out to them, because if I reach out to them and they're like, I'm not disabled, I'll be like, that's real awkward for me. So usually they meet with Carly first, and if they talk to Carly about a diagnosis or a disability, then she refers them to me. But yeah, so it's really important not to make assumptions, but it's also important not to just be like, well, I can't make an assumption, so I'm not going to do anything. Connect with your students, make sure that there are resources available on your D2L, accessibility, no, like I said, non-academic student support, wellness, that stuff's readily available for students. And then also don't forget about your Cyclones Care forms that you can fill out for literally any reason.
Well,
All right,
and
was that too long?
no, that's really helpful because I mean, I think speaking as a faculty person who, I mean, I've had students at different times who have had different sorts of, I don't really know what's going on with you and
Yeah.
something. So and I don't know if this is a requirement at our campus, but I think a good suggestion would be to do what you did, even if it's not a requirement on your syllabus, on your D2L page.
Yeah.
Just list a bunch of those resources that
Yeah.
Because and when I talk about, I always put that in my syllabus. And when I talk about it with my students, and I always say, hey, you may be perfectly fine today. You may be perfectly fine, but I have fallen and had multiple concussions.
Yeah.
And boy, you halfway through the semester now, you can't think, you can't sit up. You are not going to finish this semester. Let's see what we can do about that. Let just put all that into the syllabus at the beginning. So maybe
Yeah.
people, even if you don't have a disability today, or maybe you do and you never really thought about getting an accommodation, the seat is there.
Yeah.
You're giving the students more information, more
For
options,
sure.
more power. So
Yeah, well, and I know accessibility services is a part of the course outline, the
mhm.
required content for a syllabus. Um, I don't know about wellness or non-academic support, but when you go over your syllabus, and I always recommend that you go over your syllabus just as an
Me too.
accessibility strategy, so that if you have a student
As
who
good
might not,
teaching strategy, I
right.
concur.
And so I think that when you go over it, talk about those acquired disabilities because they happen. Like if you go to a concert and you sit too close to the music and you blow out your eardrums,
Yes,
that
for
can
example.
happen to people. And or if you are same concert, you go in mosh pit, you break your ankle, like those things happen.
You
Disability
get
is
hit
a
by a car on
natural,
the way home. You don't
right.
know.
Exactly. Well, it's like disability is a natural part of the human experience. And as modern medicine advances, disability is going to become more a part of the human experience because modern medicine is going to start keeping people who should have died alive, and we love that. We love that. But that also means that disability is going to become more and more prevalent. It also means that, students who were in a car crash that could have been fatal might be able to come back and get their degree within the year, but they'll need extra support. They'll need extra understanding and flexibility. And that's one of the things, understanding and flexibility is one of the things that are so important to disability resources that cannot be on an accommodation plan, that I implore every single person listening to me right now to consider. In what ways are you understanding and flexible in your course? Because I cannot put on an accommodation plan, be more flexible, question mark,
Try to be
just
nice.
in general. Yeah. And like, let's just understand that people have varying human experiences. I can't say that on an accommodation plan because that's not an accommodation. But it is something that I just love to remind people that like our goal is to ensure that students have a good experience and they have an equitable experience. And if that means that, like if they got, mugged on the side of the road and got injured, right? That when they come back to campus, it's not, so you just weren't here for 2 weeks and so you're not going to pass, and making sure that we give students that, grace to have things happen in their life. And know that you can always connect with me if you're like not sure. If you're like, hey, so I know the student has an accommodation plan, they haven't been in class. What should I do? What supports can I provide? How can I be more understanding? How can I be more flexible? And that's something that I can work with you case by case and we can touch base on. I'm always here as a resource to faculty as much as I'm a resource to students.
That's fantastic because,
Yeah.
and really just to sort of sum up here as we wrap up today, I mean, I think we're all here because we want students to have a good educational
Mhm.
experience. And it's more than just standing in front of a classroom and just shouting things at students.
Yes.
There's more to it. But we have this whole team of people here and we're all
Mhm.
working together and we're all making good things happen. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Avery, for coming to talk to us today about your part in the
100%.
team and making good things happen for our students. So
Yeah.
fantastic. If you have other CTL questions, check some of our other resources in YouTube and send me an email here and I will check back with you and we will have more videos, more information, more people from around the community talking about the things that they do to help. And we will see you next time.
Thank you
Bye.
guys.